This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
This episode is brought to you by Unstoppable. Discover the inspiring true story about Anthony Robles, who defied every expectation to become a national wrestling champion in Unstoppable, a new original movie from Amazon MGM Studios and director William Goldenberg, evoking the excitement and camaraderie of classic sports dramas and thrilling wrestling matches. Unstoppable features an all-star ensemble cast, including Jarrell Jerome, Jennifer Lopez, Don Cheadle, Michael Pena, and Bobby Cannavale. Watch Unstoppable now, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video.
Hello and welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name is James Dixon and I am in a very happy mood. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for downloading the podcast this week. We are talking to the brilliant author Christopher Hylland, and we are talking about La Bombonera, the famous home of Boca Juniors in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I'm going to start this episode with an apology to Chris, because this one has taken so long to get out. There was such problems in the audio. It took a while to clean up, and that's not Chris's fault. That's not my fault. I don't know what happened with the audio. But yeah, we actually recorded this, I think, back in July, which is why you'll hear at the end some of the references to his book as sort of in the future. But it's his new book, Dame Bola, about the language of Argentinian football, is out now, and it's a fantastic read. So I would encourage you to get that. And also his first book, Tears at La Bombonera, a brilliant travelogue, which obviously we will discuss in this episode because we're talking about La Bombonera, home of Boca Juniors. So all of that good stuff's to come. It's definitely worth the wait. And obviously, if you can still hear some of those audio issues, I apologise. I think it's pretty well cleaned up. It's not, I wouldn't be publishing it otherwise. But yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Before we go to Chris, as we do every week, we need to do a little bit of stadium news. And the big news this week seems to be revolving around Manchester United's Wembley of the North project, blah, 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 blah. Are they going to redevelop Old Trafford? Are they going to build something new? The advisory group of the great and good of Manchester and world sport, or at least UK sport, were out last week pumping up the benefits of a new stadium, saying it's going to bring £7 billion to the economy. I mean, that's rubbish. Absolute rubbish. It feels like the ground is being laid for attempted big subsidies to incredibly wealthy individuals in terms of the Glazers, Jim Ratcliffe, Manchester United. I'm amused a little bit because Seb Coe, the president of World Athletics and the guy who's trying to become president of the IOC, is on this stadium advisory group. The last football stadium he got involved with was the London Stadium, and that's costing the taxpayer £1 million per week in 2025 still, because of the incredibly favourable lease agreement that West Ham have. In fact, they're the only Premier League club who are profitable. I believe at the moment are West Ham, and that's because of the situation that they have for their stadium. So we'll take a fewer lessons from Seb Coe about football stadiums, I think. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. They're clearly sort of softening the ground, rolling the pitch for big public subsidy there, and I hope they don't get it, really. I just don't think it's the best use of billions of pounds of money. But we'll see. We will see. In other smaller stadium news, and this one is relevant to people who've listened to the Ground Jewels before, It's relevant to fans of the Martyrs, fans of Merthyr Town FC who play at Penderyn Park. We had the brilliant Johnny Owen on last year talking about Penderyn. And the Football Association of Wales are trying to lure Merthyr to their into their pyramid. Merthyr at the moment are playing in the Southern League. They are absolutely flying. I think they're 12 games unbeaten, well clear at the top of the league. They're going to, unless they have the collapse of all collapses, they're going to get promoted to the National League South. And yeah, it's a bit curious that the Football Association of Wales is using this moment to try and lure them back. And one of the ways that they're trying to lure them back is promising big investment and renovation into Penderyn Park. They're saying they're going to put up a certain amount of money. I think it's 2 million. They say they'll help them get other sources of funding from Welsh government, etc. So a huge carrot is being dangled there to Merthyr. So let's see what happens. They are the last remaining Welsh club in the non-league system after Wrexham's promotion to the Football League. So yeah, do they stick with that English league identity, or do they go back to the FAW? We will find out. And while I'm plugging episodes in the archive, even though it was a relatively recent episode, I feel like with the world's sporting attention turned to Melbourne for the Australian Open, it would be remiss of me not to say, we have a great episode on Melbourne from Jared Kimber from just a few weeks ago. We talk about the whole identity of Melbourne, its sporting and cultural identity, how it sits in a modern Australia. I just think that's a nice way to prepare yourself for the Australian Open, if indeed that's what you need to do. But enough about me and our guests and our little podcast, even though I quite like it. Let's get to Chris Hylland and let's get to La Bombonera.
So today on the Ground Jewels, we're joined by Christopher Hylland, the author of the book Tears at La Bombonera. So no prizes for guessing which ground we're going to talk about today. Chris, welcome to the Ground Jewels.
Thank you for having me.
And we had books out at a very sort of similar time with the same publishing company, Pitch, who produced loads of really great books. And I was intensely jealous of your book because I just thought it had such a fantastic cover. And it was really well received. It's sort of a travel log of your journeys through South America and the football that you saw there. Tell us a little bit about the book.
The cover is fantastic. I was very happy with the cover. There aren't many books. I don't think there are that many books in the football travelogue subgenre, to be honest. And I didn't set out to write one either. But I think there's a yearning. People really want to read more about traveling. Certainly at the period of time when the book was released, obviously just after, I guess you could say during the pandemic, 2021, March 2021, it hadn't quite abated, and the idea of traveling seemed maybe a little bit risky for a lot of people. So maybe the timing was good. But I think generally speaking, there are a few publications in the football travelogue genre. So I like to think it did well because of the topic, because of South American football, but also because people are wanting to read about traveling.
I think it's much more of a thing in cricket. Cricket travelogues have been historically quite popular. I remember like Miles Jupp, Fibber in the Heat, him going around India, and there's loads and loads of more classic ones too. So I think it's nice that it's progressing onto football. And the thing with football as well is, whereas cricket it's not monocultural, but it's very Commonwealth and it's all sort of old empire stuff. Whereas with football, it is the global game, and we can go and experience really, really different cultures. And I know you went to places in South America that were very indigenous. Bolivia is somewhere that I've been to as well. And how do you find the football cult? Before we get on to Buenos Aires and La Bombonera, how do you find that sort of the different football cultures where you're traveling? Is it universal, or is there something really distinctive about places like Bolivia?
I think I only went to went to a handful of games in both Bolivia and Peru in terms of the indigenous country, the more kind of indigenous countries that you're talking about. And there's a bit of a copycat culture. They tend to copy Argentina, certainly Argentina because of the Spanish language. They look up to Brazil, I'm sure, but all of the South American countries copy the songs from Argentina, the terrorist chants. There are a lot of clubs named after River Plate, a lot of clubs who maybe copy the badge of River Plate. They're in the team that I went to see in Bolivia called Nacional Potosí, has exactly the same badge as River, and their rivals are called Real Potosí and have the same badge as Real Madrid. There's a lot of it seems very cheap. There's a lot of copying. Um, the football there is very underdeveloped, and Bolivia is the poorest country in South America. Peru's not far behind, and the geography, of course, it partly explains why those countries are so underdeveloped in terms of football. So maybe they need to look up to the bigger leagues, much more like we do in Europe. I'm based in Norway, and we look to England. Very Anglophile. Norway's very Anglophile. Looks to England. Copied the style in the 90s. That's why a lot of 90s Norwegian football players did so well in the Premier League, is because the football was very similar. So smaller countries need to maybe lean on the bigger nations. In Peru and Bolivia in particular, you see an awful lot of fans of Argentinian teams and the kits of Argentinian teams as well.
It's making me want to go back to South America, but that's 9 years hence. But we will go back, to a part of South America because we're going to talk about Buenos Aires and Argentina, and specifically La Bombonera.
Yeah.
And I know in your book you talk about going. Obviously, the big game is the Super Classico, River Plate versus Boca Juniors, and I believe you've been to Super Classicos at the Monumental, River Plate's home ground, and also at La Bombonera, Boca Juniors' home ground. Which one has your heart?
It's difficult to. River Plate has an incredible stadium, and Monumental has a lot of history. World Cup final in 1978, the ticker tape that a generation maybe a little bit older than me will have seen on television, maybe one of the first World Cups they saw on TV. And Monumental is a fantastic stadium, but it's a big round concrete bowl, and they've done a lot to improve it. There was a running track, they removed the running track, they've stuck seats in to increase the capacity by 10%, 86,000 it is now. But it's very difficult to trump the La Bombonera, just for the fact that it's so steep. It's so unique in terms of the structure with three. It could be a bowl. They wanted it, and they still want it to be a bowl, essentially, much steeper bowl. But with that one side, which is looks like a block of flats, a very thin block of flats, and the rest of it is just surrounded, the three sides full of crazy fans. I think La Bombonera has my heart, but that's not taking much away from El Monumental, which is River Plate, iconic team, iconic players, iconic kit. It's a massive club, and a lot of people fall in love with that one too. I'm not a Boca Juniors fan, and I think the title of the book and the cover may suggest otherwise. And a lot of people think the book is about Boca Juniors, and it's undeniable that there's a little feeling there for Boca Juniors. But I think it's also too easy for us, the gringos, to use an unfortunate phrase, but self-deprecating, or we tend to latch onto some of the bigger clubs in Buenos Aires. So it'd be too easy for me to say I'm a Boca fan, because a lot of visitors do say that. But there's a lot of love for Boca and La Bombonera, certainly.
The literal translation is chocolate box.
Correct, yeah.
And that is reflected in the design of the stadium, the sort of sharp, high, steep sort of terracing, really, and sort of that feeling of being on top of your fellow fan. And I believe it might have changed now, but certainly when you were there were no away fans in Argentine football, were they, at that time, because of policing or security or whatever. What's that like? Because we're so used to that contrast of having that little block of away fans, particularly in sort of British and European football, providing the chants going backwards and forwards, and the ebb and flow of the sort of atmosphere of the game. when you're at those sort of big games, or maybe not even the big games, but and it's just home fans, how does that change the sort of experience there?
It seems unfair, really, on the 11 players to be the lightning rod for so much. It's intense. I mean, at least a group of away fans would take a little bit of the heat off the players, but in fact, the Argentinian players seem to enjoy the enjoy the hatred and the hostility. So it does take something away from the game. Certainly, there are games in Argentina. I mean, there's still no away fans, unfortunately, and there's absolutely nothing to suggest they're going to come back anytime soon. With the current state of Argentina, I mean, it's the police are busy. Um, a few games, Copa Libertadores games, maybe international games. I mean, I say maybe, certainly international games have visiting fans, and then you see what you're missing. But at the same time, they have to leave certain sections of the stadium empty, completely empty, as a as like as a buffer zone between the two fans. So you're losing a lot of seats. I was in Argentina at the end of last year. Spoke to a couple of people for the next book, and some people don't miss it. There's a lot more families, a lot more children, a lot more women now go to the football, which they didn't feel safe doing previously. The stadium is full rather than having these sections of buffer zones, and the policing. Buenos Aires is a city of, let's say, 40 teams within an hour of the city centre. And that is to say there's 20 to 25 games any given weekend. It's an awful lot of policing. The logistics for the police it must be a nightmare. And there's a lot of intra-fighting within fans. There's Barra Brava is a famous concept, not really anything to do with hooliganism or ultras, really. It's a separate thing. And factions within a club's Barra Brava will fight one another. So the police have to deal with that as well. And there are, assassination attempts either days before a big game or potentially at the game. So there's an awful lot going on for the police. So I can't see it coming back. What it does do is when when River scored first in that first Super Classico I went to, there's a deathly silence. You hear the bench and you hear the players shouting. And there's a short period of time where there's absolute silence. And it can last for a millisecond or it can last for like 2 seconds. And inevitably, the home crowd will kick in and they'll just drown that silence out, because silence is something that you can tease your rival fans with. Remember when we silenced you? Remember that silence? It was awful. So that it's potentially added a new aspect to the kind of lore of Argentinian football, which is the silence of an away team scoring. I've been to games in Argentina where I haven't seen the home team score. I've only seen the away team score. So you don't get that roar of the crowd. And if you had a big away section, you would at least experience like that roar of scoring a goal. And that the Argentinian roar is, you see it with any Argentinian player in any league. They celebrate it means a lot more to them. So to experience that sound when the ball hits the back of the net, you're definitely losing something there as well.
In my book on the Champions League from 92-93, I interviewed Gary McAllister, who scored against Rangers for Leeds when no Leeds fans were allowed in Ibrox because they were worried about hooliganism, and it was the first England-Scotland clash for six years, certainly post Heysel. And he didn't believe that he'd scored because he didn't have the oral sort of cue to let him know what he was confused and like sort of discombobulated, and it took somebody else sort of jumping on top of him for him to realize what had happened. Yeah, so that sound is such an important part of football, and and we saw during the pandemic as well. What happens, when those clues and those touch points are taken away from us. Let's talk Super Classico now, because I think it's what a lot of people, they kind of know. They either have seen it on, maybe they've seen it on Trans World Sport or something like that. It's one of those crossover things you look at and you see how sort of passionate and intense it was. And obviously, there's various things that have happened in that rivalry and that match over the years, including making it transfer continents a couple of years ago and having to be played in Madrid. is it incomparable when you're in there? Is it the most intense atmosphere that you've ever been to, or is that us trying to sort of create a narrative about it?
I think we do tend to build it, hype it up a lot, and we want it to be exactly the thing that I was lucky to experience one time. I went to three, well, not just one time, but to experience to such a degree that I shed tears. That the spoiler alert, the tears are tears of joy, to tears of being overwhelmed by the atmosphere. We do hype it up. It doesn't happen every time. You can't. There's absolutely no guarantee you're going to get good atmosphere going to a Boca River game or a San Lorenzo Huracan game. What you are guaranteed, you're guaranteed to have an incredible start to the game where they're welcome, where the players are welcomed onto the pitch. It's called the reception, el recibimiento, where there's ticker tape, where there's singing, they've started all the flares and the smoke bombs, which now are done by the club. So it's kind of like done very neatly and very, I wouldn't say sterile. It creates a great like image, and the sound is incredible. But the nerves mean that they sit on their hands a little bit, and they're a little bit cautious until something happens, until a red card, until a refereeing decision that they feel is against their team. Obviously, until a goal is scored. So there's absolutely no guarantee that you're going to experience an incredible derby match. I was lucky. I went to three and I saw goals in each. I saw the home team score in each. So I got that raw. I got the kind of the release of that not frustration, but the kind of nervous energy where, they could, as long as it's 0-0, they could beat us here. That said, I'm not going to discourage anyone from going, because if you have the chance to go, black market tickets. I always say that I went to the quarterfinal of the World Cup. So that in terms of the football pyramid, it's the biggest game that I've ever been to is a quarterfinal of the World Cup. Paid an awful lot of money, face value, awful lot of money to go to that game. And the quality of football and the quality of the atmosphere has nothing on even a second division derby match in Argentina. So value for money, the stadiums, the colours, everything. And the Boca River thing is Transworld Sport, probably where I first saw, waiting to go on my paper rounds back in the 90s, on a Saturday morning. I mean, the Boca always wear their home shirt. So it's always, even when they're in Monumental, they're always in the blue and the yellow. River Plate always wear their home shirt, home and away. So the iconic kits are there. Less so the iconic players, because that period of the 90s, they stayed longer. That's not happening now. You see Valentin Colo Barco, as they call him in Argentina, go to Brighton at the age of 19, and the name escapes me, but the guy's going to Man City. He's bought at the age of 17. He'll be there by the age of 19. So they don't get to see their players. This generation are going to see them in the Premier League rather than in their home league, whatever the equivalent of Transfer Sport is nowadays. I guess it's our telephones. But
It's still going. It's unbelievably still going. It doesn't. I don't think it has the same cultural
no,
relevance in a sort of multi-channel
yeah.
age. But yeah, and the guys who do the voiceover for that. I mean, one of the iconic sort of. I should know his name, but yeah, the Transworld Sport voice guy, like genuine
Mm,
hero of mine. I could pick. I remember him doing. This is such a tangent, but I remember like watching like a Channel 5 thing, or whatever channel it was on. It was just like some property program, and he was doing the voiceover. I was like, this is wrong. His voice shouldn't be turning up in
I would love to hear the
yeah.
voice. It's been 25 years. I mean, I would love to hear I'd love to hear the voice after 25 years. I've seen them online, and I'm aware they're still going, but it'd be a fantastic nostalgia trip back in time.
Broadening the sort of palette of what we're discussing here, and I think that's good, and I think that's interesting. So, in Buenos Aires itself, so Boca Juniors is in the neighborhood of La Boca. River Plate is it Belgrano, which is sort of about an hour along the coast. But
Mhm.
you've also got, it's a huge city, and you've got Huracan, you've got San Lorenzo, Vélez Sarsfield,
Yeah,
Argentinian
close.
Juniors. You know, the at least six sort of big teams, presumably all with their own sort of distinctive identities and sort of either fan cultures or quirks? Talk us through them. Take us on a little tour of Buenos Aires if you can.
Yeah, in the city, Buenos Aires city is maybe 3 million people. You don't have to go too far to leave the city, but the city itself has a handful of clubs. Boca and River are the most famous. San Lorenzo, there are five big clubs. San Lorenzo's the third of those big clubs, and Independiente and Racing are just on the other side of the city limits in Avellaneda, which is a town, but it's kind of everything's become part of Buenos Aires, whether it's Great Buenos Aires, or whether it's the city of Buenos Aires. Quite central to the city, you have clubs like Ferrocarril Oeste, the railway company previously, which is not an uncommon, origin story for a football club in South America. You've got Atlanta, you've got Argentinian Juniors, who you mentioned. So essentially, you've got quite a few nice clubs. They're neighborhood clubs. Huracan, considered quite a successful, relatively big club, but it's still very much of the neighborhood. And I don't know, like Buenos Aires is very homogenous in a sense that the people are a big mixture of 80% have Spanish or Italian or both heritage. It's a very homogenous group, and they're very proud of Argentina. It's not like small communities of people from country A, country B, country C. They did a very good job of creating a national identity. So these neighborhoods, I think the neighborhoods are very important in terms of determining an identity of the neighborhood. And the club then is the center of that, and the stadium is the center of that. I'm not sure, I don't know much about Italian history or culture or football necessarily, but Campanilismo, I think, is a famous, or people know about the idea of the clock tower, the bell tower in these small republics or these small towns in Italy. And obviously there's a big link to Italy in Argentina. It seems to represent that a little bit. But traveling around Buenos Aires, going to Huracan, for example, this is the only reason I would have gone to the neighborhood of Parque Patricios. I don't think there's any other reason I would have gone there other than just to walk around the streets. But it's a very nice, familial neighborhood with its cafes, with its bars, with its restaurants. Quite big on the tango scene, which is true of neighboring Boedo, where San Lorenzo are from. So they're very proud of that. And then, like I say, just outside the city limits, you have another band of big Lanús and Banfield are, relatively big clubs. Independiente, Racing. Only 4 hours away, you have the two Rosario teams. 1 hour the other direction, you have Estudiantes de La Plata and Gimnasia. So absolutely no shortage of teams. Platense, where David Trezeguet started, and David Trezeguet ended up going back to River Plate. I mean, not many people know, but he was born in France, but I think both parents were Argentinian, and he grew up in Argentina. So you can go to Platense, where he started. There's absolutely no shortage of options down there, and every club has its neighborhood pub, its neighborhood restaurant, and all the folklore related to the history.
You paint quite a vivid picture there. Where, if you were sort of having a free Saturday, put yourself back there when you were living there, if you had choice of where to go, or if someone found themselves in Buenos Aires, with a little bit of downtime and a holiday, where would you recommend they go if it wasn't Boca and La Bombonera?
I think Argentinian Juniors is a nice club. I mean, it's known for being a talent factory, the place where a lot of big names that we're familiar with, Riquelme, Juan Pablo Sorin, Maradona, of course. You've got the McAllisters now, who one is at Liverpool, but there's one in Belgium. One is at Rosario Central. The father went through there, but ended up at Boca. Argentina's Juniors has a reputation for creating a lot of talent. Again, the neighborhood's very nice. It's not like it's not a flashy neighborhood at all. It's very much family oriented. You have two great museums there. The first house that Maradona owned, it was bought by the club, given to him as an 18-year-old to take him out of the slum, out of the shanty town, the Vija. And that's now been converted into a museum. So you can spend the day there. You can spend half the day at the Maradona house, go on the terrace, and the owner Cesar will do an Argentinian asado barbecue. And then you can go to the club museum, because the club has a very good museum. They won the Copa Libertadores in 1985, the year that I was born. You got all the shirts of all the players that have been through the academy that have gone on to do. I think Heinze maybe I'm mistaken with Heinze, but Cambiasso was there too. To add to the Redondo was there, and now the son of Redondo has gone through there into Miami. You see all of their shirts in the museum. You see the Copa Libertadores from 1985, and then there's a great bar. Argentina have these bars called bar notables, notable bars, or like historic bars, which, I mean, you go in there and you can sense there's a lot of history in the walls. You can sense that these places have been through a lot, positive and negative. I say hundreds, plural, no, singular, up to 100 years old, let's say, between 70 and 100 years old, some of these places. And they don't do much to renovate. I mean, that I'm glad for the fact they don't do that, because you feel like you go back in time a little bit. So there's a place maybe 5 blocks from the stadium called Yatasto, which I think is named after a horse in a derby. And you can spend a couple of hours there first, walk up to the stadium, do the museums. I mean, that's a whole day. That's your whole Saturday done. And you don't have to worry about getting tickets in advance, because I think you're fairly likely to get tickets on the door too.
It's such a contrast when you were sort of saying there about Maradona's house and being sort of almost turned into a museum, and you think about the number of people who are coming through there. It made me think of George Best. And I don't know if you know George Best's house, his house he grew up in Belfast, has been turned into an Airbnb, which I think is slightly less romantic. I mean, it's great. I mean, you can go and stay in that house, and obviously, but it'd be nice if more people could see it. It'd be nice if there was those sort of living museums, and we had a little bit more. If that culture and history was a little bit more accessible.
I think you can do virtual tours of the Maradona, La Casa de Dios, and Dios spelt with a 10. I think you can do virtual tours. Certainly during the pandemic, they started with virtual tours. So if anybody's interested, I would find that.
And how did you find your reception there? I mean, you talk about it with such reverence and clearly love. I imagine you're going to be very positive about it. But there's probably a certain generation of Englishmen who have a little bit of reticence with maybe traveling to Argentina or worrying about being accepted in Argentina and things like that. Do you find, how do you find the reaction to British people there or English people? Is it generally quite good, or am I worrying about nothing?
It does happen. I've heard people experience the English thing. I didn't experience it, not in a negative way. I was traveling in Patagonia towards the end of my time in Argentina, and I was hitchhiking in Patagonia, and a guy picked us up. And talking about, I always said I was Norwegian, not because I wanted to avoid the discussion. I'm half Norwegian, so I was traveling on a Norwegian passport too. And when you speak in Spanish, it's difficult to know where people are from anyway. But hitchhiking with this guy, he asked where we were from and what we did. I was teaching English, so it's kind of difficult then to kind of hide the fact that I'm British too. He said, "Oh, I need to learn English. I need to learn English. I want to travel." I said, did you not learn English like when you were younger? None of us wanted to learn English because of las Malvinas. But he didn't say it in any kind of aggressive way. I have heard people that have experienced it, unfortunately, but you can twist it the other way around. I've got an Argentinian friend who was in London. He's a Racing Club fan. A Racing Club had the same kit as Argentina, the light blue and white stripes. So he was wearing a Racing scarf, and he's walking down one of the high streets in London. Knocked on, or he was looking for his hotel, asked somebody in a van, and they said, "What's that scarf?" He said, "Oh, it's a club from Argentina," and he just wound the window up. So it happens. Unfortunately, it happens both sides. My generation, I say my generation, I would say anybody born after 1982, certainly the people that I came across in Argentina, my generation, more interested in talking about football and a lot more interested in talking about music as well. They're massive Anglophiles. I mean, not all of them necessarily, but they massively look up to Great Britain and England, in football terms, in music terms, and because it's the first world and they aspire to be, and they deserve to be, if it wasn't for all the nonsense going on, not only now, but really over the last 100 years. But there's a lot of love there, and if you know something about football, if you show an interest in their football, they'll receive you incredibly warmly. The Argentinians are lovely, lovely people, and I've been very lucky after coming back to Europe and moving back to Oslo. I ended up playing football with on a team with 10 Argentinians, completely coincidentally. So I've kind of got a little bit of an Argentinian community here too, and no, I find them incredibly warm people. So I don't think people should be reticent at all to. They say two things you don't talk about: football and politics. If you talk, as long as you're not teasing somebody about their team, by all means talk about football. Politics is difficult, certainly now. So generally, I would avoid talking about the war, talking about the conflict, and talking about politics in general, because even reasonable people nowadays, with the politics they have down there, it's difficult. It's a difficult topic. So just stay away from that topic and you'll be fine.
It's a lot more fun to talk football anyway than politics.
Absolutely.
Coming back to sort of your book, which obviously, it's more than just Argentina. It's more than just Buenos Aires, even though we focused upon that. And I'm excited to hear there's a second one in the works. I'm going to have to ask you about that as well. But what were sort of your other highlights when traveling around such a vast continent as well? It's so different, going from the south to the north. I mean, people misunderstand how big South America is. You can be on a 24-hour bus journey and you're still in the same country. It's it's maddening. It's maddening sometimes how long it takes to get around.
It took me 48 hours to get from Buenos Aires to the Bolivian border. Potosí, I think, is only 5 hours on the other side of the Bolivian border. There was a landslide which held us up for 12 hours. But 48 hours is a long time. Brazil, the World Cup in Brazil was a highlight. I mean, I planned my sojourn and my trip down there to coincide with the Brazilian World Cup, because that was something that kind of really stood out for me as being something that if I had the chance to experience, I would love to go to Brazil. So I spent 7 weeks at the Brazilian World Cup, which I'm very grateful for, to have the opportunity. I say to have the opportunity to have saved the money for a couple of years before going down there, because it was quite expensive. But my plan was, when I left Buenos Aires, when I took the 48-hour bus to Bolivia, my plan was to travel through Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia, and I was going to settle in Medellin for a year, because a lot of people have talked very highly of Medellin in Colombia. So that was a plan. I thought, I'm ready to try something else. 3.5 years I spent in Buenos Aires, ready to try something else. I was going to spend maybe a month or 6 weeks in each country, and it would have taken me 4 months then to get to Medellin. I ended up spending 4 months in Peru. I absolutely adored Peru as a country to travel in. I ended up meeting a girl and moving back to Lima, and I ended up living there for 5 months. That was completely different. Living there is not recommended. Lima, that is. Peru, I mean, I'm sure there are lovely places in Peru where you can live and have a relatively hassle-free life. Lima is a big city, terrible pollution, terrible traffic. That's intense. I mean, Buenos Aires is nothing on Lima in terms of intensity. But in terms of traveling, Peru is it's got everything. It's affordable, so you could spend 4 months just backpacking. It's got beach, which with my complexion isn't necessarily what I'm looking for, but it has the rainforest. It has, they keep finding archaeological sites, from thousands of years going back. The Nazca lines, obviously incredible. Cusco as a city, I was expecting Cusco, the capital of the Incan Empire, to be this incredibly dominated by tourists and run down and just smoggy, but it's incredibly beautiful city with all the history there too. So Peru for me surprised me a little bit. I was aware. I mean, people that I'd met were recommending places to see and go and see and do, and that certainly didn't disappoint. But I ended up staying a lot longer than I planned to, just for the fact that the food was incredible. I mean, fruits and vegetables I'd never heard of. Um, I would love to go back for more backpacking, not to live.
But I spent a lot of time in Peru. I really enjoyed it. I never settled down for long enough to get the feeling of drag of living there. But as a tourist, Miraflores in Lima is a very nice place to sort of base yourself. You can get out. You can go to, what is it, Huacachina, and you've got
Mm.
lots of activities like sand buggying. There's stuff to do. It's really well set up for backpackers. Particularly around the sort of south and the east of the country. I found a really really warm welcome there as well. And so, I suppose, did you get up to Medellin? Did you get up to Colombia, or did you, or was the did the heart lead you somewhere else?
No, I ended up in Medellin for 3 months. I didn't stay for the full year. By that time, I was teaching English online remotely, and decided after 3 months in Medellin that it wasn't quite the city that I was that I was expecting. Not that I was expecting. That's unfair. That really struck me as the place that I wanted to live. So I spent 3 months there, enjoyed my time there, got to see and do a lot in the surrounding areas. Went to a lot of football, obviously. But the job that I had at the time allowed me to move around the country. So I stayed another 6 months, spending maybe 2 or 3 weeks in different places, and just I've done the backpacking thing. I mean, that's how I ended up in Argentina. I did the backpacking thing in 2009, where you're at a bus terminal every third or fourth day, long bus journeys, not really, not really spending enough time in the city to reflect on what you're experiencing. Sit in a cafe, people watch, enough time to meet people that you can create a bond with. I've done that, and it has its benefits. This time I wanted to travel incredibly slowly. So the idea of spending 3 or 4 weeks in a small town in Colombia, and I was working, so I had part of the day for teaching English too. But I mean, that's the way to travel. If you have the possibility, that's definitely the way to travel, because you need time to meet people, have a chance to organize something, reflect on what you've experienced, digest it all before you move on to the next place. So I did stay in Medellin, but I did stay in Colombia for 9 months, and it's also an incredible country with incredible diversity of activities, of things to see and do, of foods, climates, of course. So Medellin's unfortunate. There's a lot of problems in Medellin again now. I think there were 26 foreign nationals killed in the last, whatever the period of time was. It was a short period of time. I think it's this year. And Narcos was a very popular TV series, but it did glorify the cocaine thing. And a lot of people I came across were there for that reason. Prostitution is another aspect of that city. So it has an edge, but it's not. It might have been a little bit unfair for me to compare it with Buenos Aires. I'd been there for 3.5 years, settled there, got good friends, knew the culture, spoke the language. Not that it's a different language, but it's a different intonation and words and vocabulary and cultural baggage and everything else. It might have been unfair for me to compare a new city that I hadn't had a chance to get to know with a city that I fell in love with. And some people adore Medellin, so I'm not going to take anything away from them. But I'd end up deciding to move around a little bit.
It's about finding the place that's right for you, and that place where you feel that sense of place or that sense of belonging, and where you feel most grounded. In fact, the original title of this podcast was going to be Grounded, until I found out that Louis Theroux had a podcast called Grounded. I was like, he's probably a bit bigger than me. So yeah, it's about matching your own sort of personality with place, and yeah, you've got to find the place that's right for you. Can you tell us anything about the second book, or is it all sort of hush hush?
No, it's going to be released on the 6th of January, so we're well down the line. 6th of January is an unfortunate date, but it's my grandma's birthday, so I'm focusing on that rather than other things that might have happened on the 6th of January recently. So we're well down the line. I have to finish it in the next couple of months. It's going to be about the way Argentinians talk about football. It's looking more at something along the lines of football cliches, for those who are familiar with football cliches and do speak football. again, the subgenre of linguistics and language in football is maybe lacking some titles. It's very niche, so maybe it's not lacking anything. But Argentinians, I've been doing I use a Norwegian phrase, but I've been going a few rounds with myself in terms of in terms of comparing it with English language, because in English we have a lot of vocabulary, a lot of phrases, a lot of metaphors that come from sport, but not that many that come from football, which is surprising because football being our number one sport by far, and the thing that takes a lot of people's time every day in terms of mental processes and energy. A lot of our phrases come from sports that are 500, 600, 700 years old, maybe boxing and horse racing and cricket, which is younger. Argentina tends to have an awful lot of phrases from football, and it might explain the fact that they're completely nuts about football, but it also explains the fact that it's a very young country and the ball came to Argentina the same time that Buenos Aires was just exploded in terms of population. It was less than 200,000 people when British people first played a game of football in Buenos Aires, in Palermo. So there's an awful lot of vocabulary, an awful lot of phraseology, and a lot of the stories that are, or at least the style from Tears at La Bombonera, focusing on the curious, intriguing, entertaining, ridiculous stories that are related to football over there. There are more which are related to language as well. So it's going to be a little bit of a crossover. I like to think it's quite a good follow-up.
Sounds incredibly interesting. Linguistic exploration as well is another way of sort of taking almost a sociologist's approach to football and looking at football in the context of the communities that it sits, rather than just seeing it as a purely athletic endeavour.
As you mentioned, language is linked to sociology, identity, all these things. I mean, and Argentina were very good at creating a national identity through football, actually. So there will be a little bit of that too. It's inevitable, but I like to think that it's going to be an interesting, even for those who don't speak Spanish, it gives you a view of football through a different lens, right? That's the cliche of different languages. And Susie Dent, they call her football Susie Dent, maybe. But Susie Dent writes a lot of books about different phrases and where they come from. Maybe that's just me being a bit of a nerd, a grammar nerd, but I find it interesting, so I decided to write a little bit about it.
You can be Argentina's Susie Dent. That's something to aspire to.
I'll take that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that. The Susie Dent of Argentina. Please check out his books. They're incredibly good. The travelogue is just beautiful, and as we said, beautiful colour, beautiful writing, a beautiful continent, really. Because it's not part of the Anglosphere, I feel South America gets a little bit overlooked in our culture. But some of the best times of my life were spent traveling around there, and truly gorgeous part of the world. And that can be our segue to next week's guest and next week's stadium, because we are going back to the island of Ireland. And we are taking on the most historic and important stadium in that island. We're talking Croke Park, home of the GAA. I mean, so much history, so much great sporting drama, but so much cultural relevance and resonance in that stadium. And we have a fabulous guest to do that with. So please join us next week as we talk Croke Park. See you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. Obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors, but they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. The platform connects you with trusted experts to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including Y Combinator and Techstar startups who trust Vanta. For a limited time, get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/simplify. That's VANTA.com/simplify for $1,000 off.